Hello. Okay, so because I didn't want us to extend beyond class hours earlier, I decided to answer the other questions that you put in your exercises in a separate video, and that's what I'm gonna do today. What I'll be doing is I'll be reading your questions and then I'll try to answer them and provide relevant examples. So the questions by group 3 we already answered in class, so I won't be repeating that. Let's go next to the questions by group 2. So the first question is there any limit to inserting in-text citations to a certain paragraph of a paper? None. As long as you have space in that page, you can cite as many sources as you think is necessary to prove your point. So although there are no limit to inserting in-text citations, like in the Chicago Manual of Style, because you have that space in the footnotes section. So once you put like the numerical indicator of the citation in the footnote section, you can cite like 3 sources, 5 sources in one page. The main limit actually that you'll face is the page space, the space in the page. Because parang pangit if the footnotes flow on to the next page, but technically there is no limit. But I encourage you to cite only the most relevant and important sources, because when you cite something, you're also giving a recommendation to your reader. So citation, as we discussed earlier, helps you become accountable to the sources of the information that you used. So in the first instance, citation as a practice is a practice of accountability for how you construct the knowledge that you are presenting in the paper. So first, it's a practice of accountability. Second, citation is a practice of empowerment. Like you are empowering your reader to check the sources that you used, so that an interested reader who wants to learn more about the topic can also verify your interpretations or your claims for themselves. So you are empowering them to think independently by telling them what your sources were in writing that paper. So one is a citation, again, is a practice of accountability. Second, citation is a practice of empowerment. You are empowering the reader. And third, citation is also, again, a recommendation, a kind of recommendation. When you cite something, you're like telling your readers, hey, I read this work and I found it really insightful and informative. I think it clarifies a lot of things. I think it's worth looking at. You should probably look at it. So in that sense, when you give recommendations, diba, about where to eat at a restaurant, or what albums to listen to, what music to listen to, or what to wear, hindi naman any lang yung ibibigay mong recommendation if you care about the person who's asking for a recommendation. So you also have to be choosy. You have to be discerning about what sources you choose to cite. When you cite something, you are also contextualizing. Like, let's go back to the metaphor of academic writing as a conversation. So when you cite somebody in your writing, you are also including them in the conversation that you are creating in your paper. So if we think of regular conversations, diba? If you want to learn something, or if you're engaged in an argument, do you want to team up with people who are brilliant, have very interesting things to say, who are very smart? Do you want to team up with intellects with intellects that you find admirable, or do you want to team up with some wala lang taong mamema ganyan, 'di ba? You want to be choosy about who you want to be on your team. So citation is also like that. Although again there is no limit to who you can cite and what you can cite, if you think of your citations as recommendation, as building a team on your side in the conversation, you want to be discerning about it. You want to be picky about it. So, yon. Don't just cite for the sake of doing so. Remember again that who you cite is also communicating something about your work. So for instance, if I read the paper and I go to their citations page, tapos I look at their list of sources, just looking at the list of their sources, I can already tell what is the general direction this argument might be taking? What is the quality of thinking that might be provided? So kung puro mga putyo-putyo blog post na kung saan-saan lang kinuha yung sinite, di alam ko na, okay, the information that I'll be getting here, this is just the level of the information that I'll be getting here. Hindi siya like if it doesn't have a lot of academic sources, mas blog post na random, I'm already able to form an idea about the quality of the information that will be given to me. Or if this person is citing a lot of Marxist thinkers, for example, in their paper, then I know that this paper has a particular political bias that is going to color the analysis. So even the list of citations is already communicating something about the text itself. Even before your paper is read, your bibliography already says a lot about what you're gonna say in the paper. So that's actually the first thing that I check. And again, that's because of the nature of academic writing, as writing that is founded on existing knowledge, that builds on existing knowledge. Yeah. So second question, in what specific instances should we use paraphrasing instead of direct quotations? So for a more detailed discussion of this point, you may want to read Umberto Eco's guidelines on quotation in the book, How to Write a Thesis. I listed this also in the syllabus under the section on supplementary readings. So you might want to check pages 156 to 167 to have to see his discussion of quotation guidelines. But in general, so the question again is, in what specific instances should we use paraphrasing instead of direct quotation? I think a better formulation of this question is, when is it better to cite something verbatim, to quote something verbatim, and when is it better to do a paraphrase? Now, when you quote something, usually it's because there is something significant in the articulation of the text that you are quoting directly. There's something significant in the way that the original source articulated something or formulated something. Earlier, we talked about whether it's plagiarism when you copy somebody else's words word for word and not put it in quotation marks. And I think earlier I talked about how each individual, each writer, as they get deeper into the practice of writing, they develop a certain voice. Parang pag narinig mo yung isang tao na nagsasalita, their voice, it makes an impression na, okay, this person's voice in a real life setting, it sounds like this. You can say that a person has a shrill voice, a person has a calm voice, this person has a nasal voice, parang ganyan. Writers also develop that impression of voice in their writing because of their linguistic style, because of their writing style. So, for instance, you can tell, like, there's some writers that have very distinctive voices. Like when you read their work, you know that, oh, this was written by Cheryl Strayed, or oh, this was written by Conchatina Cruz, or oh, this was written by Adam David. Because you can tell the writer has a distinct voice. Why am I talking about this? So yung direct quotation, usually we use direct quotation because there is something that we want to reproduce in the original formulation of what we are discussing. So some things that you may want to reproduce. For instance, if you're writing a paper on a novel or a poem, and you think that there is something very significant about a line, let's say that there is a line that is very parang sobrang ganda ng pagkakasabi niya. Like the line articulates something beautifully and you want to reproduce that. So you can do a direct quotation. Or maybe the line is ambiguous. Let's say you're writing an essay on a philosophical tract, and their author said something that for you seems very like insightful but also open to interpretation. So you may want to quote the original text and then provide your interpretation of it, because the original text is not very clear. So those are examples of instances where it is relevant or it is significant to write something, or to quote something verbatim. Or let's say you want to provide a definition and you want to adopt somebody's definition of a concept. So you quote them directly. In other instances, otherwise, parang as outside of those major reasons na there's something very significant in the original formulation that you want to reproduce, or let's say you're critiquing a particular point of view and you want to reproduce the original works of the writer in order to better communicate to the reader what is wrong with the original formulation, mga ganon. If there is something very significant in the original formulation, in the source text, then you may want to quote them verbatim. Otherwise, it's better to paraphrase. Kasi what are you communicating when you paraphrase an idea? First, you communicate that you actually digested the idea and that you understand it if you are able to express it in your own words. Also, when you paraphrase kasi, usually you digest like 3 paragraphs and then you distill your understanding of those 3 paragraphs in like 1 or 2 sentences. So often we paraphrase because we want to distill or compress what we have understood after digesting or metabolizing a lot of information. So the paraphrase communicates what it was that you got after reading something long, di ba? Parang you present it in a shorter form. I want to read something from How to Write a Thesis, but I'm looking at I want to share my screen. Let me just put this here. So this is from page 165 and How to Write a Thesis. Umberto Eco writes, the most reassuring test of your paraphrases will come when you are able to paraphrase the text without looking at it. This will mean not only that you have avoided plagiarism, but also that you have understood the text that you are paraphrasing. So in general, it is actually preferable to do if what you want to do is just to communicate somebody else's ideas or to communicate what you have synthesized after reading a lot of stuff, it is actually better to paraphrase rather than quote something verbatim. Again, if there's nothing that's particularly significant about the original formulation, it's better to paraphrase. Kasi, again, in paraphrasing, you are communicating your own understanding and you are communicating that, hey, I did the groundwork, I did the spade work, I have tried to understand what I have read, and this is what I understood. So parang plus points pa siya in terms of demonstrating that you understood something. If you're not able to explain something in your own words, often it's because you don't actually understand it. So a paper that has too many direct quotations, tapos parang wala namang point to the direct quotations, medyo suspect yon. It's kind of suspect if somebody relies on doing direct quotations and then doesn't explain the quotations, doesn't elaborate the quotations, or doesn't criticize the quotations, ganon. So a further note to that is when you quote something verbatim in the text, don't leave it as is. Parang there has to be some explanation of why you are quoting that material. Are you reacting to it? Are you criticizing it? Do you want to elaborate it, or do you want to interpret it? So don't just quote something verbatim and leave it at that. You also have to explain what is the significance of that quotation. So going back to the question of what instances should we use paraphrasing instead of quotations, it's generally better to do a paraphrase if you are communicating somebody else's ideas, unless there is something extremely significant about the original formulation. Okay, next question. For the CRAAP test, is there a particular factor why the majority of students fail to take into account or is it harder than the others to notice at the glance? For example, maybe most fail to read into the agenda of an article, not noticing that it is actually a biased paper. Is there anything in particular that we need to be more careful about? Okay, so marami siyang tanong in one item. So let's break it down. Um, is there a particular factor which the majority of students fail to take into account? Uh, okay, let's look at the CRAAP test. There's another one that another version of the CRAAP test that I put in my website. Nasaan na yun? Okay. This is Sway, a Microsoft Sway. I love it. It's like it's so easy to make a website using Microsoft Sway. You might want to look at this. This is a handout that I made after reading Zachary Shore's on Grad School Essentials, a crash course in scholarly skills, and he talks about how to read, um, how to critique a text, how to write. So um, a lot of really useful tips in that book. So yeah, anyway. So CRAAP test. So the CRAAP test helps you evaluate sources according to currency, like how current is the information. Are you citing outdated data or are you citing currently relevant data, mga ganon. So currency, relevance is the relevance to your research question or problem or to the big picture of the paper. Authority pertains to how trustworthy is the source that you are looking at. Accuracy is mga questions on accuracy. Where does the information come from? Is the information supported by evidence? So it relates to reliability, truthfulness, correctness of the content, and then the purpose, why the text exists. So the purpose also relates to the no to the idea of bias na some texts more than others have a very particular agenda. So for example, if you read like a press release by Migrante Hong Kong about the plight of migrant domestic workers, you can be certain that their press release would be discussing like the labor conditions of migrant workers, how the government is not doing enough, how the Philippine government and the Hong Kong government, both of them are not doing enough to address the plights of domestic workers. You might expect them to really push for a particular agenda, and that's not always wrong, and that's not wrong pala. And parang we don't, because of a tendency uh, a tendency in knowledge production a tendency in knowledge production, especially since the Enlightenment period, is to glorify objectivity as if everything could be completely objective and completely neutral. Parang that's one legacy of the Enlightenment period, na objectivity, neutrality, these things are often taken for granted. But what a lot of more current research is realizing is that often complete objectivity is a myth. Neutrality is also often a myth. Like we have a lot of uninterrogated biases, uninterrogated positions, and when we write, it is better to acknowledge that us as writers, the people that we read, and our readers as well, we all hold biases and we all hold particular political positions. And it is better, in the interests of accountability, to take account of our biases and the agenda that we are pushing, rather than to pretend that we don't have any agenda or that we don't have any particular bias or interest. We have to be aware of what it is that we are actually, like, what is our position, what is our bias, so that we can make adjustments in our own writing. Like we can take steps to not be so blind to our biases that it affects our writing negatively. Okay, that's kind of vague. Like, okay, if let's say I have a friend who's asking me about an acquaintance. And let's say that this acquaintance is somebody that I dislike intensely for reasons, um, for my own reasons, ganyan. Tapos kunwari sasabihin ni friend, hey, I like this person, I kind of want to date this person, or I kind of want to work with this person. Can you tell me about this person? Now, if I know that I have like really intense dislike for this person, not because of rational reasons. Maybe I don't like their smell. Maybe I don't like the sound of their voice. Mga ganong petty reasons. But because of the sound of their voice or something they said 2 years ago, I developed an intense dislike for this person. Now, if I am aware of my own very subjective attitudes towards this person, then when my friend asks me about this person, I might try to be more careful about how I represent the other person, knowing that I am very biased against the other person. Does that make sense? Parang if you're aware of your existing biases, then when you represent somebody else who is affected by your biases, then you want to be more careful about what you say. So I can tell my friend who's asking, um, I think this person is a really good worker. I'm not very impressed with their body of work so far, like with their essays, ganyan. But they're very competent in their job, and if you want to work with them, I think they have a strong work ethic, mga ganyan. So it could be that I really dislike the other person, but because I'm aware of my bias, when my friend asks me about the other person, I'm more careful, and I think more deeply about, okay, what is the basis of my judgments? What is the basis of my attitudes? Mga ganyan. So again, in a context where bias is inescapable, then instead of pretending that you have no bias, just acknowledge that you have biases, and acknowledge and try to think about how your biases may color your analysis, so that when you do the analysis, you take further steps to kind of offset the bias that you have. So for instance, you can check more sources of information. Hindi lang yung not just the information that agree with what you already think. You may want to seek different perspectives, knowing that you hold a strong bias for a particular position. So academic writings emphasis on fairness, the fair treatment of your sources, behooves us or encourages us to seek out points of view that we may not necessarily agree with, but that we need to know about in order to account for our own limited perspectives and our own limited biases. So generally, the CRAAP test boils down to asking questions like this. Now, whenever you encounter information, ask, who said this? Do they know what they're talking about? How can you tell that they know what they are talking about? Where was this information published? Is that publication a trustworthy source? Does this publication have a list of sources? Or that is to say, does this publication, is it accountable to the way that it constructs knowledge? Are those sources credible? Is this publication peer reviewed? What are the stated or implicit ideological commitments of the author or of this publication? Where does this publication get funding? How might their sources of funding affect their editorial policy? So these are all questions that are related to evaluating the information that you cite based on currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So this table, which I could also send to you, and it's also in the syllabus. Where is it? Here. So this presentation links to that. Yeah. So you can also check that. And it seems like a lot of work. Like, okay, pipili lang ako ng sources, tatanungin ko pa to lahat. Totoo ba? If you're beginning to write, it seems like a lot of work. But as you practice, and as you read more, you begin to develop it as a second sense. Parang spider sense na pagka-encounter mo ng information, it's kind of automatic to you to ask questions about currency, about relevance, about authority, about accuracy and purpose. So for instance, if I cite something from the magazine Jacobin magazine, or if I cite something from Bulatlat, or if I cite something from PCIJ, mga ganyan, I already know that these publications were founded by people who are from leftist organizations, and so the analysis that they will provide will be attentive to the concerns of the left, like greater democratization or worker empowerment. That might also mean like a stated bias against big businesses, mga ganon. You just have to be aware of what the biases of the publications are. And you can, again, you want to seek a diversity of perspectives so that you can more, you can more skillfully formulate your own take. Parang don't just believe what you encounter online, especially. You also have to ask questions about the sources, and that's very important. Going back to the question, um, why do the majority of students fail to take into account this process or this practice of vetting or choosing your sources? I think I don't know the answer to this. Maybe you need to tell me why students fail to take this into account. But there is in general a dearth or a lack of media literacy in this country. Um, and that's something that happened because of the kind of education system that we are in. Not a lot of people are taught how to assess sources critically, and which is a really important skill given that the information ecosystem that we live in is hyper abundant with information. There's so much information out there, and there are so little barriers now to communicating information that there's just too much information out there. So the skill is not really in finding information anymore. Maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, even finding information was a skill. Kasi kailangan pumunta sa library, titingnan mo yung library records nila, tapos hahanapin mo yung libro, mga ganon. So before, finding information was more difficult. It took more skill. Now, finding information is not difficult at all. You just go to Google. But the skill now is not so much about finding information, but being able to critically assess the information that you consume. Let me share with you another image. This image is from EA4. EA4 is what is it? The International Academic Forum. So this is a nice image, or like an illustration of the peer review process when you submit something to an academic publication. So if you look at this image, let me put it in a new tab. 'Di ba? Ito yung proseso ng pagpa-publish. So first, an article submits to the publication that would be acknowledged by the editor. Tapos may first screening to check yung plagiarism. To check kung the first screening checks the work for plagiarism and checks whether the work is appropriate for the nature of the publication and has a reasonable length. So for example, the publication stipulates that we accept essays under 7,000 words. Tapos nag-submit ka ng essay na 7,500 words. If it does not meet the basic criteria of a publication, that would be automatically rejected. So same in the essays that you'll be writing for this class. My particular constraints. There are particular constraints that you have to follow, otherwise your work will not be accepted. So after the first screening, you have another second screening, checking the format, sufficient references, appropriate academic language, appropriate content. If it does not meet those criteria, reject again. And then after that, you have another process where peer reviewers are selected to read the article. So peer reviewers are scholars working in the same field or the same area of study, and they are tapped by editors to assess whether a work is worthy of being published or not. So a huge chunk of the time, not naman a huge, but a considerable chunk of time by professors and academics is spent on just reviewing the articles of other scholars in the field. Parang ako, I get like at least 3 to 4 review requests per year na tatanungin ka, hey, can you review this article for us? Tapos you have to write like an evaluation of the article and decide whether it has to be accepted or rejected. So there's this level of review na it would be sent to other experts, and then the experts would give some assessment of the viability of the article or the value of the article. Tapos they send it back to the editor. The reviews are sent back. Usually the reviews contain suggestions for revision, and the essay would be sent back to the author so that they can revise and resubmit, and then another review happens. And then so the basic thing that I wanted you to understand from this illustration is that when something is published by an academic publication, an academic press, and usually when we say academic publication, this is a publication that is published by university presses or academic societies like the International Political Science Association, mga ganyan, or the Inter-Asia Cultural Studies Association. So these are publications by research institutes, universities, scholarly or academic associations, mga ganyan. And the main thing that I wanted you to take away from this is that there are various levels of filtering when something is published, when a work is published academically. That work has gone through multiple screenings, so that the work that ends up getting published, you can be pretty sure that this work has been evaluated multiple times and has been deemed to be credible and authoritative. Now, if you're just citing a blog, ano ba yung check na nandun sa blog, diba? Parang, okay, magsusulat ako, post ko sa blog, post ko sa Facebook. Nobody has given probably given nobody has checked the credibility of the information there, yung levels of fact checking, critical interrogation of claims, walang revision, mga ganon. So that's also why I encourage you to cite sources of information, kasi it helps to take a lot of the mental burden of filtering sources and assessing each source. If you're citing non-academic sources kasi, you have to be really careful and ask all of these questions in order to clarify to yourself whether the source that you're choosing is actually credible. So yon. It seems like a lot of work, but it's an essential skill in our world, which is hypersaturated with false information, and it's really like troubling to see how people can so easily reproduce information without checking the information just because it aligns with their own already held beliefs, diba? There's also something problematic about that, na confirmation bias, na now we tend to believe things that we already believe in the first place. And if what we already believe in the first place is problematic or plain wrong, then if you tend to believe things that align with that just because it confirms your own position, not because it is actually founded on critical interrogation, facts, etc., then there's a problem. Yeah. So what prevents us from doing this? I don't know. Maybe ignorance of the significance of vetting your sources of information. Maybe laziness. I don't know. You actually should tell me what it is. For me personally, sometimes I make the mistake of not being careful about my sources if what the source communicates is something that agrees with my own position. So personally, I'm most careful about confirmation bias. Na again, the tendency to believe in things that we already believe in. That for me is what I'm most careful about. Kasi like I'm so like I have great confidence in my ability to assess sources, to research mga ganyan. But in the end, tao lang din ako, right? And we're all people with our own biases. And if we know that we tend to believe that which confirms our biases and our deeply held beliefs and values, then we have to again be more careful in accounting for that tendency to believe in what we already believe in. So, yon. Next question. How do we cite our references when the author cites another author in a specific paragraph? Okay, so this is what you call an indirect source. And the way that you cite an indirect source is dependent on the citation format that you use. So an indirect source is when you cite a source that is cited by another source. Okay, to give a concrete example, let's say that you are reading a work by Tolentino, and in the work by Tolentino, he cites, let's say he cites Gramsci. He doesn't actually do that, but let's say he cites Gramsci. So he cites Gramsci verbatim. So you want to cite Gramsci, but you did not directly read Gramsci. You are reading Gramsci via the mediation of the work of Tolentino. So that's what you call an indirect source. When you cite a source that is cited in another source. Yeah. So how you cite that depends on your format. So let me show you citing indirect sources. So many tabs, so many tabs. Yeah. So in APA, is this APA? Yeah, in APA, an indirect quotation or secondary source is when the ideas of one author are published in another author's text, but you have not read or accessed the original author's work. So in APA, you have to include both the original author and the author of the work where the quote or idea was found in the in-text reference. So you usually use the phrase as cited in. So here is an example. So the original author's last name as cited in the author last name of the work where the quote is found. So Miller as cited in Agrios 2005. So in this example, the author that you actually read is Agrios, and Agrios is quoting Miller. So when you cite Miller, who, let's say that Agrios quotes like an entire paragraph from Miller, and you are quoting or citing, you're quoting that paragraph by Miller that you found in the essay by Agrios. So in APA, you cite it as Miller as cited in Agrios. In MLA, instead of putting as cited in, you cite quoted in. So again, APA uses the phrase as cited in. MLA uses the phrase quoted in. In the Chicago Manual of Style, you put, this is what you put in the note. Sa ano kasi, sa Emily and APA, you just cite the original author and then you put quoted in, and then in your works cited list, you put Clark, not Leonard, but Clark. Kasi Clark is the source that you actually accessed in the works cited list. Same with APA. Now you put the original author's name, Miller, as cited in Agrios, but in your references page in MLA, you put the Agrios reference kasi yun yung in-access mo. Again, when you put a citation in your paper, you are saying that, hey, I read and accessed this source. So si Agrios yung lalabas sa references page, si Clark ang lalabas sa works cited page. This is for APA MLA. In the Chicago Manual of Style, you have to cite both. In this example, hacking, the work by hacking, is quoted in the work by Delanda. So when you cite the entire thing in the notes section of the paper, diba, earlier we discussed that the Chicago Manual of Style has 3 parts, yung number, and then the footnote section, and then the bibliography. So in the footnote section, you put the bibliographical details of the original author. Where do you find this bibliographical details? You find it in the works cited list or the references list of Delanda. So in the notes, you put the bibliographical details of the source that is quoted in Delanda. So you put the bibliographical details for both sources, both the direct source, your direct source is Delanda, and the indirect source, hacking. who is quoted in Delanda. But in your bibliography page, you only cite Delanda, not hacking. Kasi you did not actually read the social construction of what? What you actually read is a new philosophy of society. It just so happens that this work quotes hacking. So in the footnotes again, you put the bibliographical details of both sources, both your direct and your indirect source. This is your direct source, the source that you actually read. This is the indirect source, the source that you read in another source. Diba? But in the bibliography, you only list the direct source, the landa. Kasi yun lang yung binasa mo. And basically, hope that is clear. Okay, next question. This is questions by group 1. Okay, madaming questions si group 1. The first question by group 1 is, there are still topics or subjects that have not been explored that much yet in the academe, and this results in a gap in studies. That can be cited, or a gap in peer-reviewed work. Despite these issues, if they're related to what you're writing, can these papers still be included in the bibliography? I actually don't understand this question at all. I have read it multiple times and I still do not understand the question. Kasi parang, how do you cite a gap if there is nothing that is written about it? Kasi it's a gap in research nga, so nobody has written about it, or there's very little that has been written about it. How do you cite a gap? So I don't understand this question. So maybe when I post this discussion, you may want to help elaborate or clarify your question so I can also answer it. But as it stands, I don't know how to answer it because I don't understand it. But if there is a gap in the research, and often you'll be told that there is a gap in the research by other researchers researching on the same topic. Parang they'll say, okay, I tried to look for information about this, but I did not find any because nobody has written about this. Mga ganyan. You can mention in your paper that such a gap exists, but you also have to ask, okay, why am I mentioning that there is a gap? Do I intend to fill that gap? If so, then it's relevant to mention it. If not, then bakit mo pa siya babanggitin? So there has to be like some reason for why you're mentioning a gap. Second question by group 1. Given that some word processors like Microsoft Word and Google Docs have a built-in citation tool, how does the academe view the use of online citation generators and the like? It's fine. It's not cheating. Like do what works for you. So some citation generators or references programs that are particularly helpful include Zotero or references management tools. Best reference management software. When I was doing my thesis, I used Zotero a lot kasi it exists as like a Chrome extension. Tapos ang ginagawa kasi ng Zotero, if you put it as a Chrome extension, when you visit a website, let's say this is Zotero. Hindi siya si Zotero, obviously. So let's say this is Zotero. When you visit a website, ganyan. Pag pinindot mo si Zotero, it will automatically store the metadata of that website. Maybe I should install Zotero to give you what do you call that? A demo.
The first step you need to take before using Zotero is to download it. So if you go to
Okay, ewan ko kung naririnig yung voiceover, but basically, what Zotero does is it stores your sources here, tapos it stores the metadata like item type, journal article, book, or whatever it is, and then the title, the author, abstract, volume, ganyan. Sometimes it does that automatically, like if it's a web source, tapos if the back end of the web source includes these information, page numbers, date, ganyan. Sometimes it is able to get these metadata or bibliographical information automatically. Sometimes you have to input it mechanically. So when you're writing your thesis, it's useful to use programs like this kasi it helps you keep track of your sources very easily. Tapos, Zotero has the option of creating citations using various formats. So basically, it stores the data in the. So Zotero is basically a database, right? And it's a tool for generating citations. So you input the data here. Basta lagay mo yung author, item type, abstract, ganyan, issue number, date, etc. And then you choose whether you want to cite it in MLA, APA, Chicago, whatever, and then it generates the citation list. So that's extremely useful if you are writing like a very long work with a lot of sources. And it has the added benefit of allowing you to easily edit your sources using multiple citation formats. So for example, let me go back na to my thesis. Not to self-promote, but like, so yun. Bakit kasi hindi? Ayan. So for example, di ba, as you see, this essay uses the Chicago Manual of Style. Nasa na? Yan, Chicago Manual of Style. Tapos ito yung references list. So let's say, so this is a PhD dissertation. Tapos, let's say that I want to publish particular chapters as individual papers. Ano sa yun? Yeah, so you have specific chapters and you want to publish them in different publications instead of like publishing it as one book. I might want to publish it as separate publications in different journals. So let's say that I submit this to the Nations and Nationalism Journal, and then I submit this to the Modern Asian Studies Journal. Tapos I submit this to Humanities Diliman, mga ganyan. Each journal would usually require a different citation format. I think Humanities Diliman uses MLA. I think Modern Asian Studies uses Turabian or Chicago. And then let's say another journal uses APA formatting. IPS, ano yun? Nations and Nationalism Journal might use APA, mga ganyan. So the benefit of using a reference manager like Zotero and other types of reference managers, may mga reference management software like Mendeley, EndNote, ReadCube, EasyBib, Zotero, ganyan. The benefit of using these is that it allows you to easily like convert your citations to different formats depending on where you want to publish it. But the difficulty with using a citation generator, because and as I mentioned, I was using Zotero in grad school, is in the end, marami pa ring mali dun sa citation mo. Kasi these generators are not 100% correct all of the time. Sometimes, kasi pag mali yung encoding ng metadata by the web publisher, then when Zotero captures and records that data, mali yung magiging data. 'Di ba? Parang if mali yung pagka-encode ng data, yung lalabas na citation ay mali din. So when you use automated software to generate your citations, like it's a good draft of a citation. But ultimately, you still need to check whether the citation is correct. Like this citation list, how many pages is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, what? 13, 14. Okay, so it's a 14 page references list. This list I did in like 1 to 2 days, and I formatted it manually. Like I checked each chapter and then compiled this manually kasi OC ako about citation. So I don't trust I don't trust reference management software. Like it's okay for the first draft of the citation list, but I never simply use the citation software and put it there. I check each source mechanically, and I go back to my sources to check whether the bibliographic information is correct. So going back to the question of, is it considered cheating if you use citation tools? No, it's not. But just know that these citation tools can also be mistaken, especially if there is a mistake in the encoding of the data that it uses. So you still have to check the citations. And personally, I like doing citations manually kasi it's also a form of meditation for me. When I type down every single citation that I cite, I am also remembering what I got from these sources. And I'm also driven to think about, why am I including this source in my references list? Kasi labor siya, di ba? Magko-compile ka ng 14-page bibliography. Labor siya. So you ask, is this source worth my labor of encoding it here? Does it deserve to be in my paper? Mga ganong questions. So I like doing citations manually, even if it's labor intensive, because for me it's a form of meditation and an opportunity to assess each source individually. So kilala ko talaga. Kung magsasite ako sa papel ko, kilala ko talaga yung source na sinasite ko. Anyway, but that's just me. I'm that's kind of weird to some people, to actually like doing manual citations. I like doing manual citations. Anyway, next question. The date of access is not always included in citations. How do we determine when it is required to introduce these? It depends. Generally, if you have, because it depends on the citation style that you use. Like, I think APA always requires you to put your date of retrieval of the source, even if there is a publication date. Usually, the date of access is put if you do not have a publication date. And that's especially relevant when you cite websites, digital content. So if you don't have if the website does not list the publication date, then you can put the date of access. You can also put both. Let's say there's a publication date, but you also want to put your date of access. You can put both. Why? What is the significance of putting the date of access? Kasi when you publish a book, like a print book, pagka-publish nun, yun na yun, di ba? Hindi mo naman mare-recall yung libro to change the page numbers, for example. Like, when you publish something in print, what you end up publishing is pretty stable. Like, the content in that work is stable. Kasi you cannot easily change printed material once it has been published, because it costs money to publish. Like, you write a book, you publish 1,000 copies of the book. It's not easy to recall and change the content of 1,000 books that are circulated in print, whereas a website is easily changeable. Like, even now, I can easily change the content of my website. Punta ka lang doon, ganyan, edit mo, ganyan. Ang dali nang baguhin ng content, di ba? It's so easy to change the content of a website. So usually you put your date of access uh, because you are indicating na was what I am citing, the information I was citing was published maybe in 2019, but I accessed it in 2021. And maybe the 2021 version of that web page is different from the 2019 version of that web page, kasi nga it's so easy to edit digital content. So that's the answer to the question about the date of access. In general, again, if there is a date of publication, you can just cite the date of publication. Or if there is a note about the latest revision, you can cite the date put in the latest revision. Parang kunyari some websites put last updated on blah blah blah. So you can cite the date of update. If you don't have the date of publication, then you can put the date of access. If you want to be, kung gusto mo maging sigurista, I want to be more careful about the dates, then you can cite both the date of access and the date of publication. So, yon. And in general, the date of access is more important when you're dealing with a website that is dynamic, like easily changed, easily updated material. So the last question, this one, I think we also discussed this in relation to the questions of group 3, which were answered in class. So this concludes my di pa pala magko-conclude. May sasabihin pa pala ako about your exercises here. So this is from the original, like the initial survey that you answered for this class. So one question was, acts classified as intellectual dishonesty include all of the following except. So most of you answered none of the above, and that is the correct answer. So some people answered this one and this one. Okay, so copying. So the question is, what does not fall under intellectual dishonesty? So this one answer, copying phrases and sentences verbatim or word for word and reproducing them in your paper without quotation marks but with attribution. As I discussed earlier, that is still plagiarism. Kasi you are reproducing the words as your own, even if those were not your own words. So even if you put a parenthetical citation, like the example that I discussed earlier, if you copied a word verbatim, or if you used a bad paraphrase, now you copied a text and then just changed a few words, but retained the essential, like the structure of the sentence, like you did not actually formulate it in your own words, but you just copied something, changed a couple of words, tapos yun, reproduced it now. Even if you have citations, if you do not put verbatim quotations in quotation marks, that is still plagiarism, and you will get a failing grade for that. That is still plagiarism because, again, you are misrepresenting another person's words as your own. That is plagiarism. This one, submitting an essay entirely composed of sentences paraphrased from other sources with attribution. If the specific instruction or the specific requirement of the class is for you to provide your own perspective, your own take, your own argument, tapos you just submit an essay that you composed of sentences paraphrased from other sources. So defining whether this is plagiarism or not, or intellectual dishonesty or not, depends on what the requirements of the specific essay is or the final paper is. If you're explicitly asked to provide your own opinion on the subject, if you're explicitly asked to support or to make an argument about something, and you don't do that, you just paraphrase sources from multiple sources, presenting very little content that is your own. Even if you put attribution, if you did not contribute anything to what you submitted, that would still be considered intellectual dishonesty. Now you just submitted something that is entirely composed of works by other people, and you did not have any contribution in that aside from paraphrasing the works of other people. Next thing that I wanted to clarify, the prescription period for acts of intellectual dishonesty. There's some confusion about this. The correct answer is 20 years upon the discovery of the misconduct. I'm referring to the Code of Student Conduct. Let me see prescription. So the prescription period, you see this in section 4. Cases of intellectual dishonesty shall prescribe 20 years upon the discovery of misconduct. So even if you graduate in like 2010, your let's say you plagiarized something in your undergraduate thesis, your degree can still be revoked within 20 years of the discovery of the misconduct. So let's say you wrote your thesis in 2010, tapos it was only discovered that you plagiarized your undergraduate thesis in 2022. 20 years after 2022, you can still face the consequences of plagiarism. That's how seriously it is taken in the academe. So why do I mention this? I think you guys need to read your sources more carefully, and to, because I also noticed that sometimes you misspell your sources, like in the exercises, some author names are misspelled, mga ganyan. So read the stuff more carefully so that you don't make errors like that. So yun, 20 years upon the discovery of misconduct. So the people who put the 6 people who answered 20 years, you are correct. The majority who put 6 months, no, you are not correct. So intellectual dishonesty. Okay, so that concludes my presentation or the Q&A about citation practices. So if you have more questions, you can write it in the comment section of the page or the post. Thank you.